You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your PMP certification journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Compliance is the discipline of ensuring that a project operates within all applicable rules, standards, and obligations. It differs from quality. Quality is about meeting stakeholder requirements and fitness for use, while compliance is about obeying external or internal requirements regardless of preference. A product may be high quality but still non-compliant if it violates safety standards. Conversely, a deliverable may be compliant but not meet customer expectations. Project managers must manage both dimensions simultaneously. Compliance provides legitimacy and protects the organization from legal, financial, and reputational harm. On the exam, when STEMs describe quote 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 a quote 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 Laud quality assurance. The purpose of compliance management is twofold. First, to identify obligations that apply to the project, and second, to plan, execute, and document activities that demonstrate adherence. Unlike optional best practices, compliance obligations are mandatory. Failing to meet them can halt the project, trigger penalties, or cause reputational damage. PMI emphasizes that project managers may not be lawyers, but they are stewards of governance. That means knowing when compliance requirements exist, ensuring they are translated into actionable controls, and maintaining evidence of adherence. On the exam, distractors often suggest ignore unless an issue arises. The correct answer emphasizes proactive compliance planning. The project manager's stance is neutral facilitator. You do not invent compliance requirements, but you ensure the project team understands and follows them. This may involve coordinating with legal, compliance, or audit functions in the organization. It also involves documenting how compliance obligations map onto project activities and deliverables. The key is integration compliance is not an afterthought bolted on at the end, but a thread woven through planning, execution, and closure. On the exam, STEMs that describe surprised by non-compliance at delivery usually highlight the failure to integrate compliance early. Correct answers emphasize embedding compliance from the beginning. The first step is building an inventory of obligations. These may come from laws, regulations, industry standards, contracts, or internal policies. For example, a pharmaceutical project must follow FDA requirements. An IT project may need to comply with GDPR for data privacy, and a construction project may need to meet local safety codes. Internal obligations might include financial reporting, procurement procedures, or sustainability policies. The project manager creates an obligation inventory, ideally linked to each work package or deliverable. On the exam, STEMs about no clear list of compliance needs point to this step. Correct answers emphasize identifying and documenting obligations comprehensively. An obligations inventory must also include owners. Each requirement should have someone accountable for monitoring and fulfilling it. Without ownership, compliance falls through cracks. Some obligations may be owned by specialized functions, such as legal or finance, while others belong to project leads. The project manager ensures that obligations are visible, mapped to activities, and assigned to responsible parties. A compliance register or obligation matrix is a common artifact. On the exam, distractors may suggest leaving ownership ambiguous. Correct answers emphasize documenting owners clearly and ensuring responsibilities are tracked. Obligations are not static. They may change during the project. New regulations can emerge, contracts may be amended, or internal policies may be updated. The project manager maintains the obligations inventory as a living document, refreshing it on cadence with governance bodies. This ensures that compliance is current, not outdated. On the exam, stems that describe project followed outdated policy highlight this failure. Correct answers emphasize reviewing and updating the obligations inventory periodically to reflect evolving requirements. Once obligations are identified, the project manager works with the team to plan controls and evidence. A control is the mechanism that ensures compliance is met, such as approvals, checklists, tests, or segregation of duties. Evidence is the record that proves compliance occurred, such as signed forms, audit trails, or system logs. Planning controls means deciding how compliance will be verified. Planning evidence means deciding what will be collected and how it will be stored. PMI stresses that no evidence equals no compliance in audits. On the exam, stems about auditors could not verify usually test evidence planning, not just activity performance. Controls should be simple, effective, and integrated into existing workflows. Overly complex controls slow progress and breed circumvention. For example, requiring dual signatures on financial transactions above a certain threshold is a straightforward control. Logging every conversation about a requirement may be excessive. Evidence should also be proportional. High-risk areas require detailed evidence, while low-risk areas may require summaries. The project manager balances efficiency with assurance. On the exam, distractors often describe either no controls or excessive controls. The correct answer emphasizes proportional, efficient compliance planning. Evidence management requires clear ownership and repositories. Documents, logs, and approvals must be stored in accessible systems, with version control and retention policies. Ad hoc storage in personal folders undermines compliance. The project manager ensures a single source of truth for compliance evidence, often within the organization's document management or audit systems. On the exam, stems about missing records point to failures in evidence management. Correct answers emphasize defined repositories, access control, and retention schedules. PMI's philosophy is that compliance is only as strong as the evidence trail supporting it. Integrating compliance into workflow is the next step. Compliance cannot be a separate, parallel process. It must be embedded in how the team works. For example, if regulatory approval is required before a milestone, that approval is included in the schedule baseline. If a contract mandates safety inspections, those inspections are part of the work breakdown structure. Integration ensures compliance steps are visible, resourced, and scheduled. On the exam, stems describing, quote, compliance delayed because team overlooked requirements highlight this failure. Correct answers emphasize embedding compliance into project plans and workflows, not treating it as optional. Integration also means educating the team. Team members must understand which activities are compliance-driven and why they matter. Awareness prevents accidental violations. A culture of compliance begins with making obligations clear and accessible, not hidden in legal documents. The project manager may provide training sessions, visual job aids, or reminders in project dashboards. On the exam, distractors may suggest keeping compliance knowledge within management. Correct answers emphasize making compliance visible and accessible to the team. PMI stresses compliance is a shared responsibility, not a managerial secret. Integrating compliance also requires assigning time and budget. Controls and evidence take effort, and failing to plan resources leads to shortcuts. The project manager estimates the effort for compliance activities and ensures they are reflected in cost and schedule baselines. This avoids the perception of compliance as extra work. On the exam, clues like compliance tasks delayed due to lack of resources highlight this failure. Correct answers emphasize including compliance in baselines, not leaving it as unfunded overhead. Monitoring compliance means checking whether obligations are being met throughout execution. This involves periodic audits, status reviews, and evidence checks. Monitoring prevents surprises at the end and allows corrective action early. Auditing may be internal, performed by the project team or compliance function, or external, depending on requirements. The project manager ensures findings are documented and addressed. On the exam, distractors often describe waiting for regulators to check at the end. Correct answers emphasize proactive monitoring and internal audits during execution. When compliance gaps are found, corrective and preventative action (CAPA) is required. Corrective action fixes the specific gap. For example, re-executing a missed inspection. Preventative action addresses root causes, such as updating procedures or training to ensure it does not recur. CAPA EAA ensures that compliance improves continuously rather than repeating failures. PMI emphasizes that compliance management is a cycle of detect, correct, and prevent. On the exam, STEM's about same issue recurring test whether preventative action was applied, not just corrective. Correct answers emphasize CAPA, not one-time fixes. In summary, managing compliance begins with distinguishing it from quality, building a living obligations inventory, planning proportional controls and evidence, embedding compliance into workflows, and monitoring with CAPA discipline. Compliance is not optional, it is mandatory. Evidence is as important as action, and integration ensures the team works with compliance in mind rather than as an afterthought. On the exam, pitfalls include ignoring obligations until late, failing to document evidence, or treating compliance as separate from project plans. Correct answers emphasize proactive planning, clear evidence, and embedded processes. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Compliance does not stop with the project team. Vendors and third parties often introduce additional obligations, either through contracts or through the industries in which they operate. A subcontractor may need to meet labor laws, data protection requirements, or environmental standards. If they fail, the sponsoring organization can still be held liable. The project manager therefore ensures that contracts explicitly define compliance requirements and that vendors are monitored against them. This may include requiring certifications, audits, or evidence of training. On the exam, STEMs describing, quote, vendor-caused regulatory violation point to failures in procurement compliance. Correct answers emphasize including compliance clauses in contracts and verifying vendors fulfill them. Managing vendor compliance also requires oversight. Service-level agreements may include compliance elements such as response times for incident reporting, requirements for secure handling of data, or adherence to safety regulations. The project manager works with procurement and legal teams to define, monitor, and enforce these expectations. Vendor performance reviews should assess not just technical delivery but also compliance performance. When vendors fall short, corrective actions or penalties may be necessary. On the exam, distractors that suggest trusting vendor assurances are incorrect. Correct answers emphasize monitoring and enforcement, not blind trust. Vendor compliance also connects to project closure. Before releasing final payments, the project manager ensures all contractual compliance obligations are satisfied. This might include receiving audit certificates, inspection reports, or signed compliance checklists. Without this diligence, organizations may pay vendors and only later discover non-compliance. PMI emphasizes that contract closeout must validate compliance as much as deliverables. On the exam, STEMs describing vendor paid before compliance validated test this discipline. Correct answers emphasize validating evidence and enforcing closure requirements. Compliance is not negotiable, it must be demonstrated. Data privacy and security deserve special attention because they represent high-risk compliance areas for many projects. Regulations such as the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR in Europe, or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, in the United States, impose strict obligations for handling sensitive data. Compliance requires both preventive controls, such as encryption, access limits and anonymization, and evidence, such as audit logs. The project manager does not need to be a cybersecurity expert, but must ensure privacy and security obligations are identified and integrated. On the exam, clues about personal data mishandled highlight compliance failures. Correct answers emphasize privacy and security integration from planning onward. Security obligations often extend to vendors and cloud providers. A project may outsource hosting but remain accountable for data protection. The project manager ensures that contracts include data handling clauses, access controls, and incident reporting requirements. Compliance in this area also involves training. Teams must understand what data can be shared, how it must be secured, and what to do if a breach occurs. PMI emphasizes accountability. Outsourcing does not absolve the project team from compliance responsibility. On the exam, distractors that suggest vendor is responsible alone are incorrect. Correct answers emphasize shared accountability and oversight. Privacy and security compliance must also be balanced with workflow. Excessive restrictions can slow progress, but insufficient controls create risk. The project manager balances this by tailoring security measures proportionally to data sensitivity and project risk. For example, highly sensitive projects may require multi-factor authentication and detailed access logs, while low-sensitivity projects may only require password controls. PMI's philosophy is proportionality. Sufficient controls without creating undue burden. On the exam, stems that describe team bypassed controls because they were too burdensome highlight poor tailoring. Correct answers emphasize balanced, workable compliance measures. Compliance looks different in agile versus predictive environments. Predictive projects often embed compliance in baselines, stage gates, and formal sign-offs. Compliance milestones may include audits, inspections, or documented approvals. Agile projects, by contrast, integrate compliance into cadence events, using definitions of done to include compliance checks or embedding compliance roles in teams. The philosophy is the same. Compliance is planned and evidenced. The difference is cadence and artifact style. On the exam, stems that describe compliance checks only at closeout in Agile project highlight misunderstanding. Correct answers emphasize embedding compliance into iterations, not deferring to the end. Hybrid projects must bridge the two. A hybrid approach may use agile practices for delivery but predictive compliance checkpoints for regulatory approvals. For example, a software development project may iterate features in sprints while maintaining a predictive compliance schedule with regulators. The project manager translates agile artifacts, such as backlog items and demos, into evidence that satisfies predictive requirements. PMI stresses that hybrid governance must clarify which compliance items follow predictive paths and which follow agile cadence. On the exam, distractors often suggest picking one mode entirely. Correct answers emphasize integration and translation. Compliance in Agile often relies on definitions of done. Teams may expand the definition of done to include compliance checks such as code reviews, data encryption, or accessibility validation. By doing so, compliance is verified continuously, not retroactively. Predictive environments, meanwhile, often rely on inspection points at milestones, which carry risk if compliance issues accumulate undetected. PMI emphasizes early and continuous validation regardless of methodology. On the exam, stems about noncompliance discovered late, test whether compliance was embedded earlier. Correct answers emphasize integrating compliance checks into cadence, not deferring. Let's consider a scenario. During user acceptance testing, a regulator discovers that audit evidence for required tests is missing. Options include creating records retroactively, escalating to the sponsor, performing the tests again, and capturing evidence properly, or ignoring, since tests were already done informally. The correct choice is to re-execute or confirm tests properly and capture evidence transparently. PMI stresses that evidence is as important as the action. On the exam, distractors like backdate evidence are always wrong. Correct answers emphasize transparency, proper evidence, and remediation. Another scenario. A vendor assures the project manager that safety inspections were completed, but no documentation is available. Options include accepting assurance, escalating immediately, requiring documented evidence before proceeding, or paying vendor and hoping to avoid dispute. The correct choice is requiring documented evidence and halting acceptance until it is provided. PMI emphasizes that undocumented compliance is noncompliance. On the exam, clues like vendor assurances highlight this trap. Correct answers emphasize evidence, not verbal claims. Exam pitfalls in compliance are predictable. One is confusing quality with compliance, assuming that if deliverables are acceptable to stakeholders, they must also be compliant. Another is failing to document evidence, leaving the organization exposed during audits. A third is treating vendor compliance as the vendor's problem rather than the project's responsibility. A fourth is ignoring data privacy or security obligations because they seem technical. PMI stresses that compliance is mandatory and collective. On the exam, distractors often involve shortcuts or assumptions. Correct answers emphasize structure, evidence, and accountability. Another common pitfall is treating compliance as an afterthought. Teams may focus on speed or stakeholder satisfaction while neglecting regulatory or contractual obligations. This leads to costly rework and reputational harm. PMI emphasizes that compliance must be integrated from initiation through closure. On the exam, clues about compliance failure discovered at the end highlight this mistake. Correct answers emphasize early planning, integration into baselines, and continuous monitoring. A quick compliance playbook helps anchor the task. Step 1. Identify all obligations and create an inventory with owners. Step 2. Plan controls and evidence proportionally to risk. Step 3. Integrate compliance into schedules, baselines, and definitions of done. Step 4. Monitor with audits and apply corrective and preventative action. Step 5. Enforce vendor compliance through contracts and evidence. Step 6. Protect data privacy and security with proportional measures. Step 7. Tailor agile and predictive compliance processes appropriately. PMI's philosophy is simple: no evidence, no compliance. On the exam, correct answers reflect this structured, transparent approach. In summary, planning and managing compliance requires vigilance, integration, and evidence discipline. The project manager identifies obligations, plans controls, embeds them in workflow, monitors continuously, and enforces accountability with vendors and teams alike. Data privacy and security stand out as critical areas where compliance cannot be assumed. Agile and predictive methods differ in cadence, but both require continuous evidence. On the exam, pitfalls include ignoring compliance until late, trusting assurances without documentation, or confusing quality with compliance. Correct answers emphasize proactive identification, structured evidence, and transparent enforcement. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.